Naomi Michael spent every penny she had to disappear into a high-rise fortress, thinking she was finally safe from her dangerous ex, unaware she had just moved down the hall from a man who bought the entire building just to keep her as his personal obsession. Naomi's hands were still shaking as she swiped her new keycard. After months of living in the shadows of Darnell's surveillance, she had finally found a sanctuary of biometric locks and silent guards on Billionaire's Row. This was supposed to be the final chapter of her nightmare, the moment she became a ghost. But as the elevator doors slid open behind her, the silence was shattered. She didn't find the peace she'd paid for. Instead, she found him. Jin-ho didn't look like a monster. He looked like a god in a $5,000 suit. But while Naomi clutched her box with a white-knuckled grip, Jin-ho's narrowed, analytical eyes weren't looking at her luggage. He was cataloging the fear in her posture and the hypervigilance in her eyes. To the world, Jin-ho was the untouchable billionaire CEO of a global import empire. But as he stepped toward her and whispered that her ex-boyfriend had just cleared security at the airport, Naomi realized the terrifying truth. She hadn't just moved into a new apartment. She had moved into the kingdom of a Korean mafia boss who had already decided that her life belonged to him. Naomi fumbled with her keys, the metallic jingle echoing too loudly in the sudden, oppressive silence of her new apartment. Her sanctuary felt less like a haven and more like a gilded cage, the whispers of Jin-ho's chilling declaration still clinging to the air. Your ex-boyfriend just cleared security at the airport. How could he possibly know, and why did he seem so pleased? She dropped the moving box, its contents scattering across the polished floors, but she barely registered the mess. Her gaze was fixed on the sleek black counter, where a single elegantly wrapped gift box sat. It hadn't been there a moment ago. With trembling fingers, she tore at the ribbon, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a framed photograph. It was her, captured in a frantic sprint down a rainy street, her hair plastered to her face, a look of pure terror etched into every feature. The timestamp on the bottom corner confirmed her worst fears, the day she ran. The heavy door of the 34th floor clicked shut, but the silence inside was louder than the city below. Naomi's pulse thrummed in her ears, a frantic rhythm that didn't slow even as she sought refuge in the lobby the following morning. The concierge, a man whose professional smile didn't quite reach his eyes, avoided her gaze as he handed over her redirected mail.
"Mr. Park is thorough," he murmured, his voice barely a shadow. "He bought the building 3 weeks ago, fired the entire security detail in an hour. He says he likes to keep a personal eye on his investments." The investments felt like a cold finger trailing down her spine. Back in her apartment, Naomi sat on the edge of her unmade bed, the welcome photo still face down on the counter. Her laptop felt heavy in her lap as she typed the name into a private browser, Jin-ho Park. The search results were a curated wall of corporate accolades and charitable galas, but deep on the 4th page, a broken link caught her eye. She used a cache search tool to pull up a scrubbed article from a defunct Seoul tabloid. The headline made the air leave her lungs. "The Ghost of Incheon, CEO linked to vanishing socialites." The article featured a grainy photo of a woman who looked hauntingly like Naomi, dated 2 years prior. Below it, a single sentence remained unredacted. None of them were ever seen again once they entered his shadow. The air in the hallway felt thinner, colder as Naomi stepped off the elevator. Every shadow on the 34th floor seemed to stretch toward her like reaching fingers. She hurried toward her door, the weight of the disappearances article pressing against her mind, and a heavy footfall echoed behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The scent of stale tobacco and cheap cologne cut through the sterile, expensive air. A scent she recognized from the life she had tried to bury. Darnell hadn't sent a ghost. He had sent a message. The man behind her was large, his presence a dark blot against the minimalist decor, and his pace quickened as she fumbled with her biometric lock. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird seeking exit. "Naomi," the man rasped, his hand reaching out to catch her shoulder. The scream died in her throat, paralyzed by a sudden jarring movement. Apartment 4A did just open. It vanished inward. Before the stranger could lay a finger on her, a hand, strong, pale, and sleeved in charcoal silk, shot out from the darkness. With a terrifying fluid grace, Jin-ho seized the man by the throat. There was no struggle, no shouted warning, only the muffled sound of air being forced out of lungs. Jin-ho's eyes met Naomi's for a split second, cold, possessive, and utterly calm, before he hauled the intruder into his suite. The door clicked shut with a soft, final thud, leaving Naomi alone in a silence that was now far more terrifying than the threat itself. The silence in the hallway was absolute, yet the air vibrated with the violence that had just occurred behind Jin-ho's door. Naomi stood frozen until the handle turned again. Jin-ho emerged, his suit jacket removed and sleeves rolled up with surgical neatness. He didn't look like a man who had just handled a threat. He looked like a man who had just finished a minor administrative task.
"He won't be bothering you again," Jin-ho said, his voice a smooth, low velvet. He stepped aside, gesturing into his darkened foyer. "You haven't eaten. Fear burns through glucose, Naomi. Come, let's discuss your future security over dinner." Terrified to refuse, and even more terrified to enter, she followed him into a space that felt less like a home and more like an observation deck. The floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the city, but the interior was dim, lit only by a few recessed lights that caught the sharp edges of his jawline. A table was already set for two, a bottle of vintage wine breathing between them. As he poured a glass, Jin-ho didn't look at her, but his presence filled every corner of the room. "You think you're safe because of these walls," he murmured, sliding a glass toward her. But Darnell is persistent. He's currently sitting in a black SUV 3 blocks north, wearing a navy windbreaker and those scuffed work boots you always hated. He's checking his watch. He thinks he's waiting for a phone call that is never going to come. The wine in Naomi's glass remained untouched, the crimson liquid shimmering like a fresh wound under the dim lights. Jin-ho stood by the window, his silhouette cutting a jagged line against the city skyline. For a moment, the predator's mask slipped, replaced by a hollow, haunting grief. "I had a sister once. She was vibrant, full of light, and convinced that she could outrun a shadow. I told her I would protect her, but I was young, and I believed that rules and distance were enough." He turned, his dark eyes locking onto Naomi's with an intensity that made her lungs seize. "She died in a place very much like the one you just fled. I won't let history repeat itself. You are the second chance I never deserved." The admission felt like a heavy shroud being draped over her shoulders. It wasn't love, it was a desperate, twisted atonement. As he walked her back to her door, he pressed a small, sleek silver device into her palm. A safety alarm, he called it, a direct line to him if she ever felt the walls closing in. Once inside, Naomi collapsed against the door, her fingers tracing the cold metal of the gift. A faint, rhythmic pulse caught her eye, a microscopic blue light flickering beneath the casing. Her heart skipped a beat. She pulled up the diagnostic app she'd learned to use while hiding from Darnell. The screen didn't show a distress signal. Instead, a map of the building appeared, a red dot centered exactly where she stood, broadcasting her coordinates, her heart rate, and every breath she took directly to his phone. The blue light of the tracker pulsed to Naomi's palm, a rhythmic reminder that she was now a data point in Jin-ho's private map. She moved to hide the device in a kitchen drawer, but her foot caught on something crisp near the threshold. A single black rose lay on the floor, its petals unnaturally dark, as if dipped in ink. Tucked into the thorns was a scrap of paper with handwriting that made her stomach drop. "Nice view, Naomi. I like the 34th floor." Darnell. The fortress had a leak. The biometric locks, the silent guards, and Jin-ho's lethal intervention hadn't been enough to stop a ghost from the past. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. If Darnell could get a message past a billionaire's security, he was closer than Jin-ho realized, or perhaps Jin-ho was letting him get close to see what she would do. She scrambled to the door, needing to throw the deadbolt, to feel the click of the heavy steel against the frame, but as she reached for the handle, her breath hitched. The heavy, reinforced door wasn't just unlocked, it was ajar. A sliver of the sterile, silent hallway peeked through the gap, the golden light from the corridor bleeding into her darkened foyer. The unbreakable seal of her sanctuary had been breached, and as the door swung wider under the weight of a slight draft, Naomi realized the predator wasn't just watching from the shadows anymore, he was already inside. The open door was not a breach by Darnell, but an invitation into Jin-ho's war room. Naomi found him standing in her living room, silhouetted by a dozen floating monitors he had installed while she slept. On the screens, grainy surveillance footage showed men in dark suits moving through the city with surgical precision. One by one, the faces she recognized from Darnell's inner circle were being forced into unmarked vans or pinned against brick walls. Jin-ho was systematically dismantling Darnell's world, erasing his existence with a flick of his fingers. "You're cleaning the streets," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling as she watched a familiar associate of her ex disappear into the shadows of an alleyway. "I am removing the weeds," Jin-ho replied, his gaze never leaving the monitors. "But Darnell is merely a symptom, Naomi. He is a small man with a very powerful shadow." He scrolled through a hidden data cache, revealing a series of encrypted wire transfers. Naomi's breath hitched as she saw the name at the top of the ledger. Senator Sterling. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Darnell wasn't just a jilted ex, he was a protected asset, a fixer for one of the most powerful men in the country. She looked back at the welcome home photo, then at the tracker in her hand, and finally at Jin-ho's cold, triumphant smile. She wasn't just a guest or a second chance. She was the only lure shiny enough to bring a senator into the line of fire. The rain slicked the cobblestones of the narrow alley behind Billionaire's Row, turning the shadows into ink. Darnell sat on his knees, his face a mask of bruised ego and shattered bravado, while Jin-ho's men stood like statues in the periphery. Jin-ho himself stepped forward, the barrel of a silenced pistol catching the dull glow of a street lamp. He didn't look at his captive, he looked only at Naomi. "He's the architect of your nightmares," Jin-ho murmured, pressing the cold weight of the weapon into her hand. His fingers lingered on hers, a dark promise of shared secrets. "The senator's protection is gone. There are no cameras here, no witnesses. End the cycle, Naomi. Claim your peace." What air tasted of ozone and wet pavement. For a heartbeat, the urge to pull the trigger to erase the man who had hunted her was a physical ache. But as she looked from Darnell's trembling form to Jin-ho's expectant, possessive gaze, she saw two sides of the same coin. One wanted to break her, the other wanted to own the pieces. "No," she whispered, her voice gaining a sudden crystalline clarity. She turned away from the gun, reaching instead into her jacket to pull out the encrypted drive containing Sterling's ledgers and Jin-ho's own surveillance logs. Standing at the mouth of the alley was a woman in a dark trench coat, Special Agent Miller of the FBI. As Naomi pressed the evidence into the agent's hand, the look of predatory triumph on Jin-ho's face fractured into something unrecognizable. She wasn't just escaping Darnell, she was dismantling the kingdom of her protector. The gallery was a sea of white walls and soft jazz, a stark contrast to the sterile fortress Naomi had left behind. Her breath hitched as she looked at her work, vibrant, chaotic splashes of color that told the story of a woman who had finally stopped running. For the first time, she wasn't a ghost or an investment. She was the artist, the architect of her own identity. The FBI had done their job. The senator's fall had been a televised execution, and Darnell was a fading memory behind iron bars. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with a genuine smile that no longer felt like a mask. But as she neared the back of the room, where a large canvas titled "The Gilded Cage" hung, the temperature seemed to drop. The familiar scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain drifted through the air. In the deepest shadow of the corner, partially obscured by a marble pillar, stood a figure in a charcoal suit. Jin-ho didn't approach. He didn't need to. His presence was a silent weight, his analytical eyes cataloging her success with that same predator at rest stillness. He had navigated the legal storm with the grace of a man who owned the wind, and though the FBI had his ledgers, they had never found his soul.
Their eyes met across the crowded room. He raised a glass in a silent, mocking toast. A neighbor, a protector, an eternal shadow. He was no longer her master, but as the blue light of the tracker pulsed in her mind, she realized he would never truly let her go. I pour my heart into these stories because I believe every survivor deserves a voice. It genuinely hurts to see so many watch without joining our inner circle. Please take 1 second to subscribe. It's free and it ensures you never miss a moment of Naomi's path to freedom.